the reason why there are less acquisitions than, let's say, more activity around marketing, for example, is because of that problem. I think if plenty of people were willing to lend it, I think that there would be more. So what are your thoughts around that topic?
Great question. That's usually, I would agree, that's a sticking point for most people when they begin to consider something like this. And I can actually tell you, it can be quite simplistic in getting the resources, right? And it's almost cliche, but it's so true. It's not about having the resources, it's about being resourceful, right? And I'll give several examples, right? You have different financing tools depending on the type of company that you're looking to acquire. SaaS companies, reoccurring models, something I particularly focus on and prefer to focus on, have tons of revenue models that will fund based on their annual reoccurring income. So they'll say, okay, this company is generating this amount. You can use the company to fund capital for acquisition, right? That's one example, right? And you can use tools like there's a company called Pipe, right? That will fund based on a company's annual reoccurring revenue, right? So I can go in and say, okay, this company's doing that. Pipe will say they'll do X amount in funding based on that company's revenue, and you just pay them back over X amount of time based on the cash flow of the business. That's one example, right? Other examples are for strategic mergers and so forth are saying, look, if we just do what's called a paper roll-up, right, which is we create a new entity and we swap our shares for the newer entity, our multiple increases for an exit, right? So that's called a share swap, right? I didn't actually exchange capital, right? I just exchanged shares in a newer entity for us to get a larger buyout because now we're one larger entity. So buying companies that acquire, right, will pay more for larger size companies, quote unquote. So that's a share swap example, right? There are several others that we could look at. We could look at exchanging resources, right? Hey, let's say there's a smaller company doing 300 grand per year. He's a solopreneur. He's burnt out. He doesn't like focusing on fulfillment, right? You can go to that type of person and say, hey, look, we can help get you off fulfillment, right? Help drive growth through these 3 or 4 ways, right? Et cetera. And you can focus on the parts of the business that you love. We like, 40 to 60% of the business to make that exchange of resources, right? Or help or support, et cetera. So you can exchange internal resources, right? Which is a form of capital. And most people don't think of it that way, but your expertise and the systems you've developed are capital, right? When we say capital, most people only think of finances. That's actually just one form of capital, right? Your relationships, if you ever watch a TV show like Shark Tank, if you're familiar with it, right? You notice there's a couple areas that they negotiate. It's not just how much money they're putting in. They also incentivize these entrepreneurs to say, hey, I'm a tech entrepreneur. I'm Mark Cuban. I have these relationships that you get access to by becoming a partner with me. Relational capital, right? These are all things that you can begin to exchange, right, for access to their resources or equity, et cetera, right? So I would challenge all the listeners, right? Think about what you have in your wheelhouse that you may not have thought about it, but is of huge value to even what looks like competitors, peers in your industry, et cetera, right? Because those are things that probably some of your competitors are looking for. They're trying to solve that problem that you solve regularly and say, hey, look, we could cross-sell with each other to drive growth. We could merge. There's a ton of things you could do there. Or they could just be burnt out, or here's my favorite, right, on how to drive acquisition opportunity, drive, capital for it. Somebody who's, as serial entrepreneurs, they probably got 2 or 3 other projects they now want to go focus on instead of what they're doing now. You'd be surprised. You could also get what's known as seller financing, which is they'll say, hey, I want this amount for the business. I want you to just pay me monthly installments for the business, right? Or
it is pretty cool that you can buy a business and the business actually pays for the fact that you bought that business. That's crazy, right?
That's it, right? And a lot of us might be familiar with how real estate investing works, right? The traditional ways, hey, typically you might get a loan and the tenant pays the mortgage plus a cash flow on top, right, after all expenses. And to that point, yes, it could be, that concept can be similar, right? That business could be paying, right, everything that's needed oftentimes for the acquisition.